out of the pallid marshland mists, from the dark primordial pools, out of the very air they breathed, so it seemed to our ancestors, came their ancient enemy, malaria. Centuries ago, man knew its fevers, but sought their causes in vain. In China, they were described as the fever demons, the headache demons, and the demons of shivering chill. Wise men tried to cast them out, but malaria remained the great scourge, destroying more of the human race than any other disease. Today, we know the demons which cause malaria are protozoan parasites transmitted, in the case of man, by female anopheline mosquitoes while taking the blood meal which they need to mature their eggs. After biting, the mosquito injects saliva into the wound to prevent blood clotting. Lying in the salivary glands are sporozoites, the infective forms of the malaria parasites. Minute, sickle-shaped bodies with one or more dots of nuclear chromatin. As saliva starts to flow, the sporozoites are carried into the body of the intermediate host. For half an hour, they may be found in the circulating blood. Then, for 4 days, they disappear. Probably they take refuge in the liver, because in a new form, they can be seen there 4 days later. Inside a parenchymal cell, the parasite has become spherical. It is now called a schizont, because its nuclei increase by asexual division. Day by day, the dividing nuclei increase in number, and the parasite grows larger, thrusting aside the nucleus of the liver cell. And by the 7th day, there are at least 1,000 nuclei. But although the schizont has enlarged the invaded cell, the surrounding liver tissue does not react. Around each nucleus, a cytoplasm now condenses, forming within the liver cell many tiny bodies called merozoites. Between the 8th and 12th days after the bite, the schizont ruptures, setting free a mass of merozoites into the liver sinusoids. Phagocytes invade the area and quickly engulf many of the parasites. The survivors part company. Some re-enter fresh liver cells, and there begin similar cycles. The first and subsequent unpigmented asexual cycles in the liver are called pre-erythrocytic and exo-erythrocytic respectively, to distinguish them from the pigmented asexual cycle in the blood, which is now initiated by the majority of liberated merozoites. These latter parasites quickly spread throughout the body, causing in man the clinical symptoms typical of malaria. These amoeba-like merozoites, still with a single nucleus, move in the plasma among the red cells. Eventually, they cling to host cells and, as far as we know, penetrate them. The young parasite, with its small nucleus and a vacuole in its cytoplasm, looks like a signet ring. It begins to grow, getting its nourishment from the hemoglobin of the red cell, which becomes larger and paler. Each is now called a trophozoite. As the trophozoite grows, it becomes very active, putting forth pseudopodia. Grains of hematine pigment, derived from the hemoglobin of the host, form within the trophozoite, and a reddish stipple, known as Schiffner's dots, may appear in the cytoplasm of the red cell. As the dancing pigment indicates, the parasite is very active, and the size its host cell originally was. The parasite becomes compact. Its nucleus divides. Again, it is undergoing schizogony. Soon, there are 12 to 24 nuclei, around each of which cytoplasm condenses to form as many complete merozoites. Some cytoplasm, called the residual body, is unused. The pigment is forced aside into clumps. Suddenly the red cell ruptures, freeing the merozoites into the blood and leaving the residual body and pigment to be taken up by phagocytes. The result is the onset of fever in the host. In man, these fevers have been known for many centuries as tertian and quartan. Chart a typical tertian fever every 4 hours and see what occurs. The sudden liberation of foreign protein and possibly toxins into the blood causes the temperature to rise rapidly. As the parasites grow, the fever reaches its peak and falls, causing a feeling of intense chill. After 48 hours or so, new parasites are released. So every 3rd day the fever recurs, hence tertian. In quartan, the parasite takes 72 hours to develop, and the fever recurs every 4th day. In new infections, the initial fever may be irregular, because merozoites from the liver can give rise to unsynchronized broods of parasites by entering the blood from 8 to 12 days after the bite. As schizogony becomes synchronized, however, the fever assumes the typical intermittent form. If more than one brood is in action, schizogony may occur at 24-hour intervals, causing a daily or quotidian fever, which usually reverts in time to tertian or quartan. Although treatment or immunity destroys the blood forms, it may fail to suppress the EE cycle in the liver. Later, months or even years later, these EE forms may reinfect the blood, causing the relapses characteristic of malaria. No wonder malaria puzzled the ancient civilizations. We are sometimes puzzled today, until we find parasites in the blood. They were injected by a mosquito. How did the insect become infected? Simply enough, by biting an infected host. In this host's blood, some merozoites enter the red cells as before, but develop into male and female forms called microgametocytes and macrogametocytes. The males stain lightly with widely diffused nuclear chromatin. The females stain more darkly with one dense, compact nucleus and are larger and more numerous. Both sexes have abundant pigment. Gametocytes can only mate when mature and in the mosquito. While taking her blood meal, the mosquito sucks up parasites. The asexual forms are digested in the stomach of the insect, but the gametocytes free themselves from their host cells. A violent weaving about of the pigment in the male heralds the process called exflagellation. The nucleus divides into 4 to 8 segments which migrate to the edge of the parasite. The cytoplasm becomes thread-like, and in 10 to 20 minutes, as many threads as there are nuclei shoot out from the side of the gametocyte, where they remain attached by one end, lashing about vigorously. These are the male gametes. They break free and swim off. Meanwhile, the female has undergone a reducing division of the nucleus. At length, the male approaches the mature female. A pouting projection appears on her side, through which the questing microgamete makes his entrance. For a while, the fertilized female, or zygote, remains spherical and tranquil with 2 nuclei. Then the zygote lengthens into a vermicular form called an ookinete, which glides away through the stomach contents. Within 24 hours of entry into the mosquito, some ookinetes reach the insect's stomach wall. The nuclei have fused, completing fertilization while the pigment is collected at the rear end. They bore through the epithelial lining, coming to rest under the elastic membrane covering the outside of the stomach. The parasite now returns to a spherical shape, called an oocyst, because a cyst wall develops round it. Immediately it begins to enlarge. Once again, the nucleus of the parasite divides repeatedly and the pigment is obscured. The cytoplasm becomes a spongy network of vacuoles, partitioned by an anastomosing septa. The many nuclei range themselves along these septa, and opposite them, fingers of cytoplasm jut out into the lumens of the vacuoles, carrying the nuclei with them, thus forming an enormous number of long uninucleate bodies lying radially. Soon these new forms become detached and lie in a tangled mass within the oocyst, together with the pigment, which is again visible. At last, the oocyst breaks open and sets free the progeny of this elaborate sexual cycle, the tiny motile sporozoites. The sporozoites are carried by the body fluids throughout the insect host, but the majority penetrate the salivary glands. Here they are found in vast numbers in the lumen and in the cells. The cycle in the mosquito will have taken 10 days, more or less, depending on the species of the malaria parasite and the air temperature. A high temperature accelerating development. So, we return to the point at which we started. For when this mosquito next bites, these sporozoites will be carried with the saliva into the new host's body to repeat the 2 asexual cycles and to ensure the continued existence of the malaria parasite. Wherever Anopheline mosquitoes can breed and spread malaria, a shadow is cast over the world. Hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions, perish every year. In the hot, damp tropics of India, Africa, and the East Indies and the New World, malaria is a perpetual menace to mankind. In the warmer subtropics and Mediterranean climes, the disease remains all too common. In the temperate regions live a few species of mosquito which can carry parasites, and where the earth is always cold, in dry deserts, the oceans, and the highest mountains, malaria is unknown. Malaria parasites are protozoa. In one of 2 families of a suborder, we find the genus Plasmodium, which contains species which attack reptiles, birds, and mammals, including mankind. Those which attack man are Plasmodium falciparum, causing malignant tertian malaria, Vivax, causing benign tertian, Malariae, quartan malaria, and Plasmodium ovale, ovale malaria. These species follow the life cycle already described, but each has characters which help us to differentiate them in the blood of a malaria patient. Infected blood can sometimes present a very confusing picture. Parasites may be found at every stage of development. Here is a typical thin blood film showing ring forms and trophozoites, schizonts, and gametocytes of Plasmodium vivax. Furthermore, parasites of more than one species may be present. Here is a mixture of vivax and falciparum, shown in this instance in a thick film. If rings and gametocytes only are found, falciparum malaria is indicated, because the growing forms of this parasite usually migrate into the internal organs to develop. Here they clump together, blocking capillaries and causing the pernicious symptoms often found in malignant tertian malaria. Falciparum ring forms are usually small and delicate, and several may invade one cell. Double nuclei are common, and so are accolade forms, parasites which seem to cling to the outside of the red cell. The other species rarely produce multiple infections or accolade forms, and their rings are larger, perhaps half the diameter of the host cell. Vivax trophozoites, as the name implies, are very active and their cytoplasm assumes irregular shapes. Pigment grains are small and yellowish brown. The containing red cell becomes enlarged and is often covered densely with a stipple called Schiefner's dots. Malaria trophozoites may be band-like and angular, with pigment coarser and darker than vivax. Small Siemens dots may appear on the host cell. Ovale takes its name from the distinctive shape assumed by the red cell, oval and sometimes fimbriated. Schiefner's dots often make an early appearance. Falciparum trophozoites produce dense clumps of blackish pigment and round or angular clefts in the red cell, called Maurer's clefts. In maturity, vivax grows larger than a normal red cell, and the schizont divides into 12 to 24 merozoites. 16 is a fair average. Malaria, which just about fills its host, and ovale, which is slightly smaller, produce from 6 to 12 daughter parasites, often symmetrically arranged like a rosette. The schizonts of falciparum, about 2/3 the size of the red cells, may contain as few as 8 or as many as 32 small merozoites and lumps of jet black pigment. The complete asexual cycle takes 72 hours in the case of Malaria and about 48 hours in the other 3 species. It is at the beginning of the sexual cycle that the most striking difference occurs. The falciparum parasite takes its name from its distinctive crescent-shaped gametocytes. Their presence in the blood identifies malignant tertian malaria with certainty. The other gametocytes are ovoid. Those of vivax and ovale produce Schiefner's dots. Both enlarge the host cell, especially vivax. So much for the variation among the species. Finally, having returned to the start of gametogamy, let's briefly repeat the life cycle by way of recapitulation. The gametocytes develop in the blood and pass to the mosquito. The male exflagellates, producing microgametes. The mature female is fertilized by a microgamete. The vermicular ookinete is formed. It burrows through the wall of the insect's stomach and becomes encysted. The oocyst grows and sporozoites form within it. It bursts, releasing them into the salivary glands. The mosquito bites the vertebrate and injects sporozoites. They enter the host's liver. Here they grow rapidly, releasing many merozoites. These merozoites re-enter the liver or attack erythrocytes in the blood. Feeding on the red cells, the plasmodia develop from ring forms into schizonts and rupture, releasing daughter parasites. And so the infection increases. Unless treatment is given, more and more red cells are destroyed. The vitality of the host is sapped. And if Plasmodium falciparum is the cause, malaria may claim another human victim.